In December, there was an event on YouTube called December where people just uploaded videos speaking about DOS and DOS games and so on. I didn't have a video prepared in time for that because I was waiting for parts for my DOS machine. But now, March, there's Marchintos, a series of events also dedicated to upload videos to YouTube about Macintosh computers. So, this video is my Macintosh video, and this is going to be my Macintosh computer. And you say, okay, wait, this is not a Macintosh, this is a PC. And you will be right, this is a PC, but in this video I will show you how I started to know the Macintosh ecosystem. I'm going to show you the Fusion emulator, an emulator of MacOS that runs on DOS. And this way, I killed two birds with a stone. I have a video for the past December that I missed out, and I have a video for Macintosh. So I hope you enjoy it. I know what many of you are thinking. This is supposed to be the video about Macintosh, and an emulator is not a Macintosh. However, for me it was, because when I first discovered that the Macintosh ecosystem existed, I didn't have access to a Mac as they were very expensive. What I did is looking for emulators, and in that time the emulator was one of the most important ones, even if nowadays it has been forgiven. In those times, around 1997, I was mainly using Windows 95, but there started to DOS mode to use this emulator and games. The machine I'll be using for this video is very similar to the one I used in that era. It is a Pentium 2 at 400 MHz, while in that era I was using an AMD Key62 rated 300, and it's more or less the same performance. I had a Sound Blaster 16 back then, and now I'm using a Sound Blaster Pro, but it should not make a big difference for the emulator. Also, for hard disk I'm using a compact flash card, so that will be a slightly faster in some operations. I'll be using the same system version I used before, System 7.5.3 updated to System 7.5.5. In this video, I'll show you the installation step for what was my first Macintosh, and in the next video I'll show you my SSM application that I discovered back then and continue installing on my Macintosh computer's emulator or not. While this is starting now, you will only see the last part of the boot process because my capture system does not support the standard BIOS text resolution. Neither does the GBS control scaler I have. The first step will be to insert the emulator floppy in the drive, and then we install it. The emulator I'll show you is Fusion. It started as an Amiga emulator before being imported to DOS, and finally being bought by SoftMac, a company that made a competitor emulator. In the end, open source emulators like Basilisk 2, Chipsaver, and nowadays QEMU have taken over, and Fusion has fallen into oblivion. The installation is very straightforward. Just point it to the correct destination and install. When the installation finishes, it offers us a list of languages. It is surprising it offers Catalan and not Spanish, but that was not a problem for me as back then I already had a very good level of English. You may have noticed that when DOS started, there was some software in Spanish, and that is because the system was prepared to play games with my niece in exactly the same experience I had back then, and that includes the fact that I could only get some software in Spanish and other only on English. After you choose the language, you're offered to read the README first, and then it decompresses some utilities. Now, it is time to copy the ROM file that is needed as a big part of the initial Macintosh system received in ROM. Technically, you need to have a real Macintosh to get such ROM. I'm going to use a Quadra 950 ROM file. Once the ROM file has copied, it's time to enter setup. I'm recording the Fusion setup using QEMU because my capture card doesn't support the resolution used in the real machine. This way you can see it much better than if I was using my phone handheld. It has at the start a system information on the right, and on the left you have all the various categories of options. The first category will be CDs Advanced, and here we can configure the machine ID if we want or not the startup zone and FastMath emulation. The machine ID I'm using is Quadra 950 because that's the ROM file I used. You should not mix machine IDs with ROM files. The results are unexpected. You can disable the start song if you want. I don't see why. And fast math emulation is less accurate but much faster. If you need accuracy for what you're doing on the emulation, for example, running Excel spreadsheets or something like that for taxes or whatever, you should disable fast math emulation. The next option will be the CD. So it shows you the same drive letter as DOS uses, and it allows you to set up the boot priority. So in this computer, the DOS driver is set up to drive letter key, and that's what I have chosen. On boot priority, if you're going to put a bootable CD and MacOS installation CD or something like that, you should choose CD-ROM, and if not, just change it to device. The next option is video, where you have to choose a video driver. There are several of them. In the documentation, you can read what are they for. You have two options for laptops and another for notebook. I don't really know the differences. And then there are three options for VESA that should be used on desktop. VESA Direct is the fastest one, also allows you to take screenshots while the other don't allow such option. And this is the one I'm going to use. You can always set up it and you can enable or disable Quick Draw Excel, and on the direct one you cannot change the refresh rate, but you can on others. The next option is ADB from Apple Desktop Bus. This is the bus used by the mice and keyboard on real Macintosh. It allows you to set that configuration for the keyboard. You can set the USA keyboard or ISO keyboard for the rest of the world, and you can set if you want the input to be on hardware or BIOS. You can also have direct. I have not tried it, I don't know the differences, but I know that if you use BIOS, you're gonna have problem with some key mappings. It also asks you what command key you want to map to. Right control in this case. If your keyboard has the Windows key, it's automatically mapped to the Windows key. Now on mouse, you can choose what the left and right mouse buttons do. On Macintosh, there is only one mouse button. So the normal option to get some menus, contextual menus on Mac is using Control plus click. Here you can set that to the right mouse and be like Windows. The next option is floppy. You can have two floppy drives and it has an auto detect time. The auto detect time is because on Macintosh the floppy drive reports to the system that a floppy has been inserted and the ejection is automatic. On PCs it's manual and there's no reporting to the operating system. So what Fusion does is on every 2 seconds, as it's set up right now, checks if the drive have any new floppy and then presents it to the macOS system. You can only use high density floppies because double density floppy for Macintosh are not supported by the PC floppy controller at all. The next option is SCSI. If you have a SCSI card connected, you can directly attach SCSI hard disk, tapes, magneto-optical or CD drives to the Macintosh system. Otherwise, the CD drive and any hard disk that you attach to it are going to be virtualized. Macintosh doesn't see them as real SCSI devices. This has always been a limitation of most Macintosh emulators until QEMU arrived, that they don't really emulate hardware devices, especially these devices. They just modify, patch the BIOS, the firmware from MacOS, to see whatever they present, a real CD or something like that, as devices. The good thing if you have a SCSI card is that you can attach a recorder and use it to record things from Macintosh World on a CD or backup on tape. Basilisk offers a different support in the sense that you can attach as a SCSI device any CD drive, not only SCSI CD drive, because in them they speak SCSI. QEMU, on the other hand, doesn't emulate SCSI at the moment, but it emulates IDE, completely hardware emulation. So they see as IDE devices, but not SCSI again. On the devices option, we have the hard files. The hard files are virtual hard drives. They contain the equivalent of hard drive inside a file in the DOS world. We can choose options to delete or create a hard file, and we can choose any hard file we have already created. On the network side, you can attach one DOS drive that will be appear on the Macintosh desktop, any drive. The only thing is that the drive cannot be used by a background process. For example, if you're running Fusion on the Windows 95, that could generate some problems of sharing. The next option, ports, allows you to map the two serial ports on a Macintosh to a serial port or a parallel port on the PC. You can use this to print or to use a modem. You cannot use it as a substitute for local talk because the serial controller on a PC doesn't support the protocol that's needed for local talk. On memory, we choose the amount of RAM that we want to dedicate to the Fusion emulator. This is the RAM that MacOS will see. There is more RAM usage that will be used by the emulator, but not as RAM. I have chosen 32 megabytes. That's half of what I have available on the system. On the next, we can choose the ROM file. I have already chosen the Quadra ROM that we copied before. On sound, we can set up the hardware for sound. It supports Sound Blaster Pro, Sound Blaster 16, and also supports Windows Sound System. The other option is just having it off. The last one is sysinfo that we already saw, and then there's the configuration where we can load, save configuration, delete the configuration, or sub the PRAM, something that on Macintosh is usually done using key presses on boot. We can do it here, or we can just remove the file on DOF if we want. One important thing to do before starting Fusion is to ensure we have a compatible XMS driver. Hymen is compatible, but if not being able to get Kem to work. EMS virtual drivers like EMM386 should be disabled, otherwise Fusion will just crash on startup. It's going to start from the System 7.5.3 installation CD that's currently on the drive. Once it has started, we can install it and later on update it to 7.5.5. You can see it has started quite fast and snappy. It's a fast emulator indeed. Now it's asking us to initialize the hard file we created before. I'm going to name it Macintosh HD. This is going to take some time. I'm speeding this up, but it's going to take only a few minutes thanks to the machine using a compact flash card as a hard disk. After initializing all sectors on the drives, creating the HFS structure, and now that it has finished, it's time to install the system. In the system software installers, I'm going to launch the installer. Now I will choose the virtual drive as the destination, and then I will choose custom install, where I will select all options. The only option I will not select is A/rows, because they will make the emulator crash. Indeed, it makes all emulators crash. Now that everything is selected, oh sorry, forgot this part. Okay. Now that everything is selected, it's going to install from a real CD right now. This is also a speed up, but still it's very fast. Now that the installation is completed, I'm going to exit the installer and look at the extras that comes in the installation CD. There is OpenDock, PowerTorque, and QuickDraw GX, so if you want to install them. And also, if we go to the root folder of the CD, there's a CD extras folder here. It has the Apple Telecom, Addis Updaters, QuickDraw 3D that doesn't work on emulators, so really no reason to install it. System Profiler doesn't work on Fusion, I don't know why. We have QuickTime extras from musical instruments to add more sound to the music, more power. There's also Mac PPP if you want to connect to a modem, but if you can install OpenTransport, it works much better. So I'm not going to install anything from here right now. I'm going to restart. Because this is the first start with this hard disk, it's going to rebuild the desktop file. This file is very important for Macintosh as this stores the association between the documents and applications as well as the custom icons for folders, applications, and so on. You may have noticed then the background there's some ticking noise. That's because on real Macintoshes the floppy drive notifies it. So that tick is the configuration we set up before for Fusion to seek and check if the PC floppy drive has a new floppy disk inserted. I have prepared a CD with all the applications and games, etc. I want to show you on this and next videos. I have created with a desktop file, so it's complaining that it needs to rebuild the file and it cannot find the comments from the info windows, but we don't care. There were no comments. It was created on Linux, so this is so rebuild the desktop file of the CD and we can get the core association for any application that's installed on the CD itself. Now we can see I created 3 folders for application, games, and installers. I'm going to copy the applications and games folder to the hard disk, and this is going to take also a little. One drawback of System 7 is that it cannot multitask while you're copying files. You cannot do anything while it's copying. This was fixed on Mac OS 8 and was a very waited for feature. Now that I have copied everything, I'm going to open the installer folder and install the 7.5.5 update. It comes in these copy images, so the first thing I need to do is to locate where did I save this copy. On later system versions it is on applications or on, no, I didn't copy it here. Okay, or on Apple Extras. It's not here either. Oh, it was there. Sorry, I didn't see it. It's verifying the self-extracting image. I'm going to copy it to the applications folder. And now I'm going to create an alias. It doesn't have the alias creation shortcut. Yeah, System 7. It's too old for that. So I'm going to create it from the file menu and now drag and drop the alias on the desktop. And now that I have the alias on the desktop, let's name it. I can drag and drop the System 7.5.5 update images to the alias and we'll just mount them after we agree with the line size, obviously. Now that they are mounted, I can launch the installer. Agree with the license again. Does anybody read that? Install. It's going to be much faster. Anyway, I'm going to speed it up. And yeah, it's done. So time to restart now. Now we can think about this Macintosh that we have System 7.5.5. The next application I'm going to install is Norton Utilities. I thought we used this application on DOS, as you can see at the start of the video. And when I first got the Macintosh emulator, the first thing I did was to look up for Norton Utilities for Macintosh and install it. I find it very useful. It includes utilities like Speed Disk, Norton Disk Editor, the Norton Disk Doctor, that very very useful. I'm going to just use install as this will install all of them. This is real-time speed. I have not sped up this portion of the video, so you can have an appreciation of how fast it really is when installing from CD to the hard file. There's a we can boot up from the emergency disk and activate file saver and other security features for the corruption on the disk so we can recover the data. And it needs to restart. One of the things I love about Norton Utility for Macintosh is that it installs in the upper left corner, right left to the Apple logo, a little icon that shows us the disk activity. You'll see it right now. Contrary to PCs that have a drive activity LED on the case, Macintosh do not have them, so Norton Utilities give that on software. It also shows a difference between reading and writing because when it's writing it shows a little W below the icon. The next application I'm going to install is Adobe Reader. Or better QuickTime, as QuickTime will ask us to restart, so let's just install it now. There's also QuickTime. It requires us to restart our accounts, install Staffy Deluxe. These icons doesn't look correctly because it was uncompressed on Linux and didn't save the composition properly. I'm going to install QuickTime first. QuickTime 4, the last version that runs on System 7. I'm running the license again. Full installation. Internet connection doesn't matter, not register. And this thing is sped up. Now start. QuickTime was quite the innovation in the when the first version was launched. There was no concept of multimedia really, only on very specialized machines or something for music and so on. But mixing video and audio on the same computer files and so on, QuickTime was one pioneer. So much that right now the QuickTime format is used at the base of the MP4 format for videos and the HIEF format for photos. Now that QuickTime is installed, let's install the next one. Adobe Reader. It will also ask to restart because it installs the Adobe Type Manager. That's a system extension that allows to use Adobe Type 1 fonts on macOS system, while Apple and Microsoft invented the three type font types to compete with Adobe Type 1 fonts. Oh, we don't need to restart. Good. The next thing I will install is Staffy Deluxe 5.5. Again, the icons are not in the correct position. They should show the Staffy logo. So Staffy was a very important piece of software for Macintosh. It was the mandatory, the most common used compression software. While on the PC world it was like Zip, and before Zip it was Arc, and later on RAR and 7-zip. And on Amiga it was LHA. Staffy was what Macintosh user had to use. Also, it supported to compress and decompress both on LHA and zip formats, also tar files from the Unix world, so it was a tool for all. There was also the free version that was Staffy Expander that working only for expanding files, Staffy files, or any other kind of compression file. It also allows us to uncompress the code, being hex and binary files that were used extensively on Macintosh. Because this is the deluxe version, I'm going to need a serial number. You should buy it, obviously. I think they're still selling it. I'm not exactly sure, but I don't have it handy right now, so I'm just going to copy it from here. Now let's let's install 5.5. I agree the license, another software license agreement, two of them. Now my name, organization, and the totally legit serial number. This install will cover all the needs, so if you want, you can always choose custom install and complete the stuff installation. Uh, Set it up in an applications folder. It's custom on the System 7 that our application want to just install on the root of the boot disk. But I prefer to have them all organized in the applications folder. It needs to restart. Okay, sure. Installs extension for Finder. That's why. This is a speed up because the Staffy algorithm is quite slow. It's one of the lowest in on all the installations I've done for the simulator. I don't know what exactly do they do with their compression algorithms, but it's so slow that makes you remind of more modern and efficient and memory hungry algorithms, and it's far from that. It's just slow, very slow. No, it's installed. Oh, we can see it right next to special menu that it's there, the Staffy menu. We can also see on the desktop the Staffy expander icon and the drop stash icon. Now I'm going to just update it to Staffy Deluxe 5.5.1. Again, speed up because it's very slow, the Staffy algorithm. Now that has updated correctly. The last thing to install is Wolfenstein 3D. That is shown in a later video. Hopefully I can get a capture card for my DOS so I can compare Wolfenstein 3D with the DOS version. This is the hardware version, so only the first episode is available. I put it in the games folder that I copied from the CD before with several other games I want to show you in future videos. Now that this is installed, there's no more applications to install. I'll show you the applications in another video. The applications I've chosen that the Essentials application that was installed on all emulators, and we have installed them. I will show you how they work. I will as well show you the games, especially when I get the capture card. Well, this was my first Macintosh video for 2021. I hope you like it, you enjoyed it, and subscribe if you want to see more videos about all computers, repairing all computers, all software, and all games. Thanks for watching. Bye.